We should all believe you. Why would the palace lie about this?
A couple of days ago, a viewer sent me a link on Instagram of a video asking me for my take. The video in question was an interview by Maureen Callahan with the author of the latest book on Catherine that was released last month in May, called Kate, The Courage, Grace, and Power of the Woman Who Will Be Queen, by Christopher Anderson. And what they do is basically invade her privacy for 6 minutes straight. It's an 8-minute clip, but the last 2 minutes were an ad read.
Her surgeon was the same surgeon who operated on Pope Francis. Is that right?
And when they weren't doing that, they were criticizing the palace's efforts to keep said private matters private.
I mean, this is the thing, Christopher. It goes to the inherent credibility of the institution. She does not have cancer. 2 months later, we lied. She's got cancer.
Right.
If you don't want to watch it, basically, the TLDR version is they criticize the secrecy surrounding Catherine's ordeal. And let's not forget, this was an ordeal for not only the human being who was caught in the midst of it, but her loved ones, her children, her husband, her family. I don't think I've ever really spoken out much about how disgusting the whole Where's Kate thing was 2 years ago. I certainly did not participate in it or engage in any way whatsoever, probably why I didn't bring it up. But what was so inherently disgusting about that whole fiasco was that it turned a very real, scary, and at the time, incredibly tragic development in someone's life into a game, a blood sport, and for some people, a money grab. You probably remember the story from 2 years ago when 3 staff members at the London clinic, which is where Catherine was being treated, were being investigated by the police for allegedly trying to illegally access her medical records. And while we don't know the motive, it could have been morbid curiosity, given the secrecy that was surrounding Catherine's treatment and her illness at the time. But it also could have been an attempt to make money, to sell the information to the media or an independent journalist who reached out and promised a big payday if these staff members delivered. And that wasn't even the first time that Catherine's private medical records were hacked or shared with unauthorized third parties. In fact, while I was researching the topic for this video, I came across a whole list of celebrities who have had their private medical records illegally accessed by hospital staff, spanning from George Clooney in 2007 after an accident, Britney Spears in 2008, and Michael Jackson's records in June 2010, an entire year after his death. And by the way, while the law does vary depending on where you are, health records of deceased individuals are still protected by privacy laws for a specified period of time. So clearly, violating the private health records of public individuals is nothing new. But sometimes laws are different if you're a public figure. Defamation comes to mind. In many jurisdictions around the world, being a public figure actually makes it a lot more difficult to successfully sue for defamation. But can the same be said about privacy laws? So I thought I'd put the law degree that my parents paid for to good use and do some legal research to try to understand where this entitlement that the media has when it comes to access or a right to the private health matters of public figures even comes from. Seeing as Catherine is a British citizen, she falls under the jurisdiction, of course, of UK laws and the European Convention on Human Rights. So let's have a quick look. I'm not going to bore you with the details, just a cursory view of how privacy laws when it comes to medical health records apply to famous people such as Catherine, the Princess of Wales. So in the UK, privacy laws are governed by both common law and statute. If there is a conflict, a clear conflict, statute does override common law. Just to make things clear, common law is set by court precedent, by judges and their decisions, whereas statutes are laws that are written into effect by Parliament. So in common law, there is a duty of confidentiality. which means that when a patient or service user shares information in confidence, it must not be disclosed without some form of legal authority or justification. In practice, this usually means that the information cannot be disclosed without that person's consent. In common law, there's a distinction between implied and explicit consent. Common law allows implied consent, so you didn't expressly clearly authorize the sharing of the otherwise confidential information, but then statute comes in and overrides that and sets a much higher standard of only express consent is considered consent. The relevant statute in the UK is the Data Protection Act 2018. Now, again, I'm not going to go through this in any detail, but here's a screenshot of the exceptions that apply, which enable otherwise confidential information to be processed and potentially shared. You can pause to have a look, but I don't see anything mentioning that the public status of the patient or individual in question is considered a valid, lawful exception to the rule. Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which deals with privacy, basically echoes the same thing. To quote straight from it, this right to privacy means that the media and others can be prevented from interfering in your life. It also means that personal information about you, including medical records, should be kept securely and not shared without your permission, except in certain circumstances. And if you scroll down just a little bit further, these exceptions are clearly listed. And once again, I don't see any Catherine the Princess of Wales or royalty or public figure exceptions in this list at all. Let me know if I'm blind. Maybe I've missed something. I mean, these eyes aren't getting any younger. But as far as I can see, it appears to be entirely clear that being a public figure does not mean that privacy laws no longer apply. You'd think this was elementary, but clearly some people dropped out of elementary school. I don't know. Is that even legal? I do wonder how happy Maureen and Christopher would be if two prominent media personalities or authors sat there in front of millions potentially on the internet, speculating and gossiping and violating their privacy by discussing their very private health matters and criticizing any attempts to keep them private. I'm about to quote, or I paraphrase, Meghan Markle, of all people, on the matter of privacy. She once said in the Oprah interview, and I'm paraphrasing again, just to make it clear, just because you invite someone to your home and, maybe you've got some family photos out and they can see them, you're sharing a certain aspect of your private life with them, that doesn't inherently give them automatic permission to then go through your drawers and violate your privacy and, go snooping around and looking at all your other personal items that you have clearly not put out on display. As usual, in theory, I agree with her. Now, of course, in practice, this comment, this notion, this argument, I should say, couldn't have come from a worse messenger, as is always the case with Meghan Markle. She will say things that on the face of it make sense, but then it's all talk and no walk.
Down with the monarchy! We deserve our privacy!
But in general, removing the messenger from the statement that was made, I entirely agree with her. As someone who is also on the internet, there have been instances where people get really mad at me when I don't answer their very personal questions, as though they're entitled to that information simply because I put myself on the internet every once in a while. Clearly, there is a divide between what you see and the rest of my life, and I'm entitled to that. As is anyone out there on the internet. We should be free to choose what to share with the world, and that doesn't automatically in any way give the world a right to know everything about us, to all of our personal information. Having said that, I think we should also acknowledge the very human element to this. Not everything is done with nefarious or malicious intent. For example, in my situation, when people really kind of get on my case to know certain things about me, maybe they're just curious. And sometimes curiosity gets the better of us. I'm not exempt from this. Recently, a fitness influencer that I used to follow since 2018 when I was just a kid at university, and I looked up to her as an older sister. She recently passed away this year, and she was only 36. So young and so beautiful, with so much life ahead of her, so much promise. And of course, I was curious, I still am, about the cause of death, which has not been disclosed. Just because we care and just because we're curious to know what happened, that doesn't mean we are entitled to that information. Just because she put herself out there on the internet for years when she was alive, that doesn't mean we have the right to violate her privacy in death. I think we can agree that there is a huge difference between being curious and keeping it to yourself versus the whole witch hunt that people have subjected, for example, Catherine to during her darkest moments. And I would argue some still continue to do so today by bringing up old things and old stories just to make a quick buck and sell their book. People such as Maureen criticize the palace for how they've handled this mysterious illness. And I would say to that, there's nothing mysterious about it. It's simply none of our business. All of these celebrities, from influencers to pop stars to kings and queens, are human beings first and foremost. And they're entitled to just as much privacy and dignity as the rest of us are. It's a really dystopian place we find ourselves in, where people and institutions are being criticized for doing the right thing, for maintaining someone's privacy, for maintaining someone's dignity. And it's all the more troubling when you consider that the people who are already suffering immensely are the ones who are being subjected to this pressure to divulge. Look, gossip is gossip. There's a place for it. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I'm not interested in hearing, stuff every once in a while. But it's one thing to talk about what someone wore or what they said or how they behaved, especially in public. But it's entirely another to discuss someone's private health matters that they've taken extreme steps to keep private. But that's all I have to say on this topic. Thank you to the viewer who sent me this clip. I would not have seen it otherwise, and I would still be wringing my brain about what on earth to talk about. Thank you so much for your support. Do check out the link to Patreon in the description box if you'd like to support this channel further. And if you can't, you know the drill. You. See you next week. Take care. And I've already said see you next time. Bye-bye.